Now, before we get into today's video, I want you all to click the link below and join my email list right now. There's a whole lot of great content that I want to send to you, but YouTube doesn't let me show you. Must be systemic racism. They deleted a bunch of our videos, but that will not stop me from telling you the truth. So join my email list right now. The link is in the description. Well, the affidavit that supported the warrant that caused the raid on Mar-a-Lago has been released, although it's heavily redacted. So I'm not quite sure exactly what's in it. But I want to go through an opinion piece written by the Wall Street Journal. The reason this is important is because the Wall Street Journal has turned against Donald Trump. Initially, they supported him, but because of January 6th and other things, they have turned against Donald Trump. It's a Rupert Murdoch-owned publication, as is Fox News. So it's a very interesting development that the Wall Street Journal did a massive editorial where they excoriated Donald Trump for January 6th and for other things that they deemed to be misbehavior. Here's what they wrote, however, after the affidavit was turned over. The Mar-a-Lago affidavit, is that all there is? The redacted 38 pages add to the evidence that the FBI search really was all about a dispute over documents. And then they defend Donald Trump's behavior. It says it's impossible to disclose exactly what's happened because so much of this is redacted. But given the affidavit and the attachments, this really does, the Wall Street Journal says, seem to boil down to an incident, a disagreement over the handling of classified documents. A disagreement that the FBI had when somebody named former Secretary of State Hillary Clinton had an unsecured server in her basement, as we talked about before, where she sent and received documents that were classified, although she denied it at first, and where she sent and received documents that were stamped as classified, although she denied that at first. And the Wall Street Journal says the filing contains no suggestion of any greater changes or larger investigations other than a dispute over his handling of the documents. Staff appears to have been sloppy, says the Wall Street Journal, even cavalier in storing the documents. Classified records were found mixed in boxes with newspapers, magazines, printed news articles, photos, miscellaneous printouts, notes, and presidential correspondence, the affidavit says. But it fanned suspicion that the important documents were still floating around the house. Put another way, says the Wall Street Journal, the FBI thought Trump was behaving badly, quote, as he so often does, close quote, says the Wall Street Journal. But here is the money line, quote, but that didn't mean the FBI and the DOJ had to resort to a warrant and federal agent search that they knew would be redolent of criminal behavior. They had to suggest probable cause of criminal acts to get their extravagant warrant, which they knew would create a political firestorm, as it most certainly did. Instead, they could have gone to a district court and sought an order for the proper handling and storage of documents. It surely would have been executed, says the Wall Street Journal. If Mr. Trump then failed to comply, he could have been held in contempt. But that's not what happened. The Wall Street Journal says, and I'm quoting him, it's hard to believe that a dispute over documents would yield a criminal indictment. AG Merrick Garland would have to explain to the public why Mr. Trump's behavior was so much more nefarious than other cases of mishandled documents, close quote. And then they refer to several of them, including Sandy Berger. We talked about him. Sandy Berger was the national security advisor under Bill Clinton. And during congressional hearings over whether or not Bill Clinton could have and should have done some more things to have stopped 9/11, Sandy Berger was in the National Archives stealing documents, putting them in his pants. Got a slap on the wrist. Quote, and Hillary got off with a sanctimonious lecture from the then FBI director, James Comey, close quote, says the Wall Street Journal. And they conclude with this. We aren't defending Mr. Trump's behavior in any of this. He brings much of this trouble on himself. But his political enemies make it worse when they break political norms themselves, referring to the FBI and the DOJ. They also help Mr. Trump by making him into a political martyr. If you're going to indict former president. You better have him dead to rights on something bigger than mishandling documents, end of quote, says the Wall Street Journal. Here is what Trump's lawyer said.
Yeah, I learned that we were right, that this is, again, another political witch hunt, that they're ignoring the fact that the Presidential Records Act protects the president and allows him to have the ultimate authority to declassify things. And they blacked out anything that would be relevant. Frankly, there is nothing that's relevant. You know what I learned from this, Jesse? That this was about documents, the same documents that NARA and our attorneys on the ground that were handling this had been cooperating and working with the DOJ to get to NARA. Do you know that the Presidential Records Act doesn't even have a fine or penalty in place because it's a cooperative working together scenario for any president, except you're allowed to put it in your sock drawer, smash emails, and hide it in your crotch if you're a Democrat.
Referring to Sandy Berger, or some people refer to him, Sandy Burglar, and Hillary Clinton. Now, remember, hit that like button, hit subscribe, and we post new segments of the Larry Elder Show every single day. And make sure in the description you hit click the button so that you're put on our mailing list. Why? Well, we are still being banned many times by YouTube. So videos that you otherwise would see, you're not going to be able to see unless you click the description below and you get on our mailing list. That brings us to MyPillow. As you know, the great Eldersky, the sage from South Central, the Prince of Pico Union, the czar of common sense, sleeps on MyPillow every single night. Even when I go on vacation, I take a little MyPillow with me because sometimes the hotel pillows, Also, if you go to mypillow.com and use promo code ELDER, you're going to find a number of other products, including the MyPillow towels. They are the Giza Dream Sheets, the finest cotton in the world, and they come in different colors. Also, the My Towels, soft yet absorbent. Have you noticed a lot of towels look good, feel good in the store? You bring them home, they don't work, they don't absorb. These work, these absorb, and they look great. And don't forget the MyPillow, My Simplers. They feel very comfortable. I'm tempted to wear a pair on when I do the show, but I'm afraid I may fall asleep. So go to mypillow.com, use promo code ELDER, or call the number on the screen, mypillow.com. Now, Alan Dershowitz, just as I, has made a prediction. His prediction is that the DOJ will not invite Trump after he saw this affidavit. Quote, I'm going to make a prediction here, Dershowitz said. If no more evidence comes out based on what's in the unredacted portions of this affidavit, President Trump will not be indicted. I don't think Garland is going to indict him for technical violations of these kinds of statutes that look very similar to what happened to Hillary Clinton. I think the same standard has to apply to a Republican candidate as to a Democrat candidate, end of quote, says Alan Dershowitz. And again, the portion of the Espionage Act that Hillary allegedly broke did not require a finding of intent. Yet James Comey does his presentation, outlines her behavior as sloppy, reckless. The statute only requires the behavior to be grossly negligent, and clearly she met that standard. And then at the end of his presentation, he says, but she lacked the intent to violate the statute. Intent is not even an element that's required in the statute. And according to the affidavit that we've seen, the unredacted portions anyway, national security was not cited by the DOJ as reasons for the redaction. Now, I want to turn to what Joe Biden said. Joe Biden, at a campaign stop, said this, and I'm quoting. I still haven't seen any video or audio of it, so this is a quote. This is Biden referring to Donald Trump. What we're seeing now is either the beginning or the death knell of extreme MAGA philosophy. It's not just Trump. It's the entire philosophy that underpins the, I'm going to say something. It's like semi-fascism, end of quote. Now, I'm going to say something. I looked up fascism. Fascism is a far-right, authoritarian, ultra-nationalist political ideology and movement, characterized by a dictatorial leader, centralized autocracy, militarism, forcible suppression of opposition. We're going to talk later on in this program about forcible suppression of the Hunter Biden story. The FBI leaned on Facebook to do that. We'll talk about that a little bit later on. But this business of authoritarianism. Speaking of semi-fascism, I got a question for you. What do you call a president who, with a stroke of a pen, illegally goes around Congress and forgives the student debt of some people and not debt of other people? What do you call that? And not only that, transfers the burden of this debt forgiveness from rich people to non-rich people. What do you call that? Is there a word for that? I'm thinking of a word, looking for a word, semi-fascism, if not outright fascism. And what do you call a mandate for every man, woman, and American child to have health care insurance coverage, whether this man, woman, or child wants it, whether this man, woman, or child needs it, whether this man, woman, or child can afford it? I'm talking about Obamacare, mandating health insurance coverage for every American or pay a tax penalty. What do you call that? Is that not top down, I'll tell you what to do whether you want to do it or not, fascism? And I want to read you parts of a column written by Thomas Sowell about Barack Obama. Headline, Obama's not a socialist. Sowell says, it bothers me a little bit when people call Obama a socialist. Socialism is government ownership of means of production. And he says, Obama doesn't want that. Because if government owns something, that means when things go wrong, and they will, he'd have to own up to it. Fascism is when you let somebody else own something, but you tell that person how to operate it. Quote, what President Obama has been pushing for and moving toward is more insidious than socialism, writes Sowell. Government control of the economy while leaving ownership in private hands. That way, politicians get to call the shots, but when their bright ideas lead to disaster, they can always blame those who own businesses in the private sector. End of quote. Sowell continues, government ownership of means of production means that politicians also own the consequences of their policies and have to face responsibilities when those consequences are disastrous, something that Barack Obama avoids like the plague. Thus, the Obama administration can arbitrarily force insurance companies to cover the children of their customers until the children are 26 years old. Obviously, this creates favorable publicity for Obama, but if this and other government edicts cause insurance premiums to rise, then that something can be blamed on the greed of insurance companies. One of the reasons, Sowell says, why both pro-Obama and anti-Obama observers may be reluctant to see him as fascist is that both tend to accept the prevailing notion that fascism is on the political right, while it is obvious that Obama is on the political left. Here's what he says. Back in the 1920s, however, when fascism was a new political development, it was widely and correctly regarded as being on the political left. Jonah Goldberg's great book, Liberal Fascism, cites overwhelming evidence of the fascist consistent pursuit of goals of the left and of the left's embrace of the fascists as one of their own during the 1920s. Mussolini, the originator of fascism, was lionized by the left, both in Europe and here in America during the 1920s. Even Hitler, who adopted fascist ideas in the 1920s, was seen by some, including W.E.B. Du Bois, who's mentioned in my documentary, Uncle Tom, more about that later on, was a man of the left. It was in the 1930s, writes Sowell, when ugly internal and international actions by Hitler and Mussolini repelled the world, that the left suddenly distanced themselves from fascism and from its Nazi offshoot, and verbally transferred these totalitarian dictatorships to the right, saddling their opponents with these pariahs. What socialism, fascism, and other ideologies of the left-right soul have in common is an assumption that some very wise people, like themselves, need to take decisions out of the hands of lesser people, like the rest of us, and impose those decisions by government fiat. The left's vision, he concludes, is not only a vision of the world, but also a vision of themselves, as superior beings pursuing superior ends. In the United States, however, this vision conflicts with a constitution that begins, "We the people." End of quote. So, Biden is referring to Trump supporters as supporting semi-fascism. And when Biden was asked about that, I'll have his response for you in just a second. Hope you enjoyed that video. The full show is available to watch right now on Epoch TV. Just click the link in the description below to learn more, because we've got a country to save.